Senator Murray has been our great leader on this issue for several decades, and we're so glad to have her leading the fight.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. A lot has changed in the last few weeks. We learned that the Supreme Court plans to overturn Roe v. Wade and eliminate the right to abortion. It is a constitutional right that generations of women have known. And last week, our Republican colleagues blocked Democrats' bill to establish a federal right to abortion and protect every woman in America's freedom to make her own decision about whether or not to keep a pregnancy. Here in Congress and in states across the country, Republicans are doing everything they can to reverse your rights. For decades, they have been working to overturn Roe and strip women of their right to abortion, and now Republicans are about to get what they have been fighting for. Soon, women will be forced to carry pregnancies to term when they do not want to. My daughter and granddaughters will have fewer rights than I did. And I've been shouting this from the rooftop. Republicans are not going to stop at overturning Roe. They are now talking about a nationwide ban on abortion to prevent every single woman in this country from being able to make her own decision about whether and when to start a family. Last week, Leader McConnell refused to rule out a federal ban on abortion if Republicans take power. Just think about that, a federal ban on abortion. I never thought I would say those words. And of course, Republicans don't just want to ban abortion. They are coming after the birth control that millions of patients rely on to plan a family, which includes IUDs and Plan B. They are jeopardizing families' ability to get the reproductive care like IVF that they need to help start a family. Republicans are targeting anyone who helps a woman get an abortion, doctors, friends, family, drivers just doing their job and getting patients to a medical appointment. This is scary, it's extreme, and it's shameful. And I don't think it should surprise anyone that people in my state of Washington and across the country are not on board with Republicans' radical attempts to reverse their rights. So we are here today to make clear Democrats are not done fighting. Far from it. As Republicans work around the clock to reverse people's rights, Democrats are fighting back around the clock and making the stakes of Republicans' extreme agenda clear. We are getting together today here to make clear we are and will continue to use every lever to our disposal to protect women's ability to control their own bodies. Senate Democrats are holding private companies accountable for collecting and selling data about people who visit abortion clinics. Democrats are urging Secretary of Defense Austin to ensure service members can get an abortion. My colleagues here can tell you more about those efforts. We are fighting to make clear women and providers should not be punished for accessing critical health care services. We're making sure that patients can get birth control without any out-of-pocket costs. And by the way, federal law requires that right now. We are pushing the administration for a federal action plan to respond to the imminent end of Roe. So put simply, Senate Democrats are undeterred and will not abandon the fight to protect everyone's reproductive rights. So I want to thank all of my colleagues here today who are working with us every single minute to make sure we are on the side of American women to make their own health care choices. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Senator Baldwin.
Thank you. Well, good morning. I am so proud to be here with my Senate colleagues to send a clear message to women across the country who are frightened by the prospect of having the Supreme Court turn back the clock on women's rights. Our message is simple. We are not giving up this fight, and neither should you. We need you to join it. If the court overturns Roe versus Wade, millions of women would lose their constitutionally protected right and freedom to make their own personal decisions about their health care, their family, and body. In my home state of Wisconsin, if Roe versus Wade is overturned, women are taken back to 1849. Yes, you heard me correctly, 1849. We have a law on the books from 1849 that criminalizes abortion procedures. Doctors could be charged with felonies for performing abortions and face up to 6 years in prison and be handed $10,000 in fines. For victims of rape and incest, their rights would be taken away. That's the reality for women in Wisconsin, sent back to 1849, 16 years before slavery was abolished in our state, 71 years before women even had the right to vote. My Senate colleague from Wisconsin actually said, and I quote, "It's not going to be that big of a change." Well, I will not take women in Wisconsin back, and I'm going to continue to fight to protect the constitutional rights and freedoms of women in Wisconsin and all across America. We will engage, we will organize, and activate the American people on an issue they care about and is so deeply personal. We will call on private companies to stop putting women who use abortion clinics in jeopardy by selling their data. And we are going to do everything we can to protect and expand access to birth control, because women know better than an activist Supreme Court or politicians in Washington how to make their own personal reproductive health care decisions. I want to thank my friends here today for joining this fight. We will not go back and leave this generation of women behind with fewer rights than their own mothers and grandmothers have had for decades. We will move forward. With that, I want to turn it over to Senator Duckworth.
Thank you, Senator Baldwin. Even though it is disheartening that we still need to have this debate about whether women should be in control of their own bodies, I am proud to be here with my colleagues to reiterate that Democrats are not going to give up when it comes to protecting reproductive rights, no matter what. Despite previously repeatedly affirming a person's constitutional right to make their own reproductive decisions, it seems that the Supreme Court is on the verge of taking away Americans' rights for the first time in history. Overturning Roe won't just put women's rights at stake, it will put so many other rights at risk too, including the rights of families that are trying to have children. I know, because I have two beautiful little girls who are 4 and 7, but I wouldn't have them without having undergone fertility treatments, specifically in vitro fertilization. In states like Arkansas, Tennessee, and Kentucky, where they define a fertilized egg as an unborn child, that will potentially put IVF procedures and other procedures that families who are relying on fertility treatments to start a family on, it will put those procedures out of reach of so many Americans. Because of IVF, I got to experience the joys of motherhood. But with the systematic decades of work that Republicans have done to undermine Roe and take away women's autonomies over their own bodies, right now a woman's right to access basic, necessarily health care is on the line. And I've heard many of my Republican colleagues say, oh, no, we're just going to outlaw abortion. We're not going to outlaw fertility treatments. Well, I'm just going to quote the the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, who just sent out a very urgent bulletin that says, measures, and I quote, measures designed to restrict abortion could also curtail access to family-building treatments upon which our patients rely to build their families. And they could put those doctors at risk, and it could put them in federal jeopardy if there were a federal ban, because every time a doctor looks at a fertilized egg, like they did with mine, and say, you know what, you have 4 fertilized eggs, these 2 are not viable, we're going to discard those, and we're going to implant 2. He could be guilty of murder for those 2 eggs that were not viable, that we were discarded. And then, of the 2 eggs that he implanted in me that were fertilized, knowing that only 1 would take, he could be convicted of manslaughter when the other egg failed to implant. This is what we're doing. Illinois is already a state where women will drive 1,000 miles to come to us for reproductive choice. We welcome them. We welcome women who come as far as Texas to Illinois to either obtain an abortion or to get whatever help that they need. This is wrong that they have to do that, because you are putting women, especially women of color, especially women who are on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum, in jeopardy when you outlaw abortion. When you overturn Roe v. Wade, but you don't actually vote, when you support the overturning of Roe v. Wade, but you don't support child care and you don't support family leave, then you are a hypocrite, because women need autonomy over their bodies. And when you outlaw abortion outright, even in the cases of rape, incest, or the health of the mother, you put women in jeopardy. I had to have a DNC. I had a miscarriage. And in order to pursue my beautiful rainbow baby that I had to have a DNC in order to clear out my uterus, in order to continue with my fertility treatment. That option would now be unavailable to me, were I to live in some of these states that have these snapback rules on abortion. Let's be clear. Shame on people who think it is beyond the pale to regulate firearms, but totally fine to regulate our uteruses. I refuse to let my daughters grow up in a world with fewer rights than I had, and I won't stop working to codify Roe v. Wade into law and ensure reproductive freedoms are protected for all women. And I am proud that it is Democrats who are standing up for women. And I'll hand it off now to Senator Warren.
Thank you. Thank you, Tammy.
Thank you.
Let me wait.
I'm going to get out of here.
Yep, I'm going to wait.
All right, I'm going to go this way, you go.
And I'll go this way. So we're here today because Republicans, politicians, have spent decades plotting for this moment, all to force their unpopular extremist agenda on the rest of America. After the Supreme Court's draft opinion leaked, I said that when abortion is illegal, wealthy women would still have access to safe, legal abortions. That instead, this opinion would fall hardest on low-income women, on women of color, on women in rural communities, on women who have been raped, on women who have been molested. And that they are the ones who will pay the price for Republican extremism. And yes, it will fall hardest on these women, but I want to be clear. This decision will affect every woman in America. No one is safe. Women across this country, in red states, blue states, and purple states, will feel the consequences of overturning Roe. And if Republicans move forward with their plans to pass a nationwide ban on abortions, as they have already said they plan to do, then no one will be spared. There will be no safe haven in America. Here's just one example of what that could look like. I led a letter this week signed by over a dozen of my colleagues calling out data broker companies for their alarming practice of selling cell phone location data of women visiting abortion clinics. Think about what that means. Tracking a woman who leaves Texas, goes to California, and spends 4 hours in the parking lot, or her car does, 4 hours in the parking lot of a Planned Parenthood center. Left unchecked, these practices would allow anyone with a credit card to buy the location data of a woman seeking abortion services, including crossing state lines, and then to use that information potentially to target them. These practices are dangerous. They threaten the safety of everyone who seeks access to care. This is a 5-alarm fire, and Democrats are using every tool possible to try to protect a woman's right to choose. We will keep fighting here in Congress through legislation. The Biden administration will do its part through executive action, and elected officials across this country will step up this fight at the state and local level. We must make our voices heard loud and clear, because we will not go back. Not now, not ever. And it is now there I am. To Duckworth, sorry, Maria. To Senator Duckworth.
That's all good. Thank you, Senator Murray, for organizing this, and it's great to be here with my Senate colleagues. A few weeks ago, a political earthquake did happen in the United States with a draft release of what could potentially be a ban on abortions for women in the United States of America. And we're here today to say we need every American who cares about these privacy rights to call their representative, their senator, and say, stop a ban on abortions. Now, since this time, a few weeks ago, what's happened? We have seen millions of Americans march in their local communities to say that they want to protect women's reproductive rights. We have heard from record numbers of women calling our offices, emailing us, sending us information, saying that this is unbelievable running over of their rights. We've heard heartbreaking stories of women who've talked about sexual assault and they had no choice but to abort that fetus. And what they want to know is if we are going to stand with them and stand for the hard choices that they've had to make. So we're asking our colleagues to be clear here. Are they for upholding these constitutional rights, or are they going to continue to help a Supreme Court run over those constitutional rights? We know that 70% of Americans do not want to see Roe v. Wade overturned. They want these rights upheld. So who are the Republicans talking about? 25% of the Americans? This clearly is not in the mainstream view. Mainstream Americans have counted on this right, depended on this right, exercised this right, and now the Supreme Court is pretending that they never heard of settled law, never heard of mainstream views, and never heard of constitutional rights to privacy. So the answer for this is for the American people to hold their elected representatives accountable, to make our voices heard, and to march with the young women that I have seen in my state marching, because they want to know, are they going to grow up in a different era, an era they never imagined they were going to have to deal with, that makes them a second-class citizen. I guarantee you that is not what Americans want, and if we raise our voices loud enough, get these members held accountable, ask about their voting records, their intentions, and ask them just a plain and simple question. Do you stand with a ban on abortion? And make it clear that if they do, then America does not stand with them. I'll now turn it over to my great colleague from the Senate Judiciary Committee, who's done a fabulous job on that committee, Mazie Hirona.
Thank you.
The question is, who gets to decide? Is it the woman or is it government? We have radical right-wing justices on the Supreme Court who think it should be government, not the woman, who gets to decide, as they are poised to undo a constitutional right that women in this country thought we've had for almost 50 years. It is Republican legislatures, Republican governors in at least 26 states to date who think it's government, who think it's them, not the woman, who should decide, as they pass dozens and dozens of laws limiting a woman's right to control her own body, a woman's right to get an abortion. People who yell and scream about having to wear a mask think it's okay to force a woman to have a child. Do you see the absurdity in all this? Do you see the absurdity in women flying thousands of miles to places like Hawaii, driving hundreds of miles to places like California or New York to exercise control over her own body? Do you see the tragedy of women who will die as a result of botched abortions? And who will die even in childbirth, because we in our country already have the highest maternal death rates among developed countries. So women in our country are going to wake up one morning soon and realize they no longer have control over their own bodies. The question is, who gets to decide, the woman or government? I stand in solidarity to say loudly and clearly, it is the women, it is us, not government, who gets to decide.
Well said.
Senator Gillibrand, my pal.
Thank you, Ms. Maisie. You know, I have some extraordinary colleagues with me today, and each one of them has looked at this issue from a different perspective, but every single one of them is right. The Declaration of Independence promised life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. All of those rights have been enshrined in the U.S. Constitution through various of our constitutional amendments. The Supreme Court guaranteed a right to privacy over the last 50 years, and this draft decision obliterates all of those rights. This decision is a threat to our lives. It's a threat to our liberty. It would make more than half of Americans second-class citizens without equal justice under the law, without due process under the law, without a right to privacy, without freedom of speech and freedom of religion. It undermines their basic human rights, civil rights, and constitutional rights in every way. Make no mistake, this is a moment where every person in America, every woman, every person who knows a woman, who loves a woman, and who cares about a woman should be speaking up and speaking out, because these rights are being taken away. This group of women, this group of senators, we will work night and day to codify Roe. We will not stop until we restore these constitutional rights to half of America's citizens. This week I'm also introducing legislation, the Healthcare Provider Safety Act, to provide funding for reproductive health care providers to enhance the physical and cybersecurity of their facilities, personnel, and patients. I've also sent a letter to the Secretary of Defense, Secretary Austin, to ensure that our military service members who are serving in places that are abrogating their civil rights will have access to the health care services they need. This has been a complete disregard of the human rights of our American citizens. So Justice Alito, Justice Gorsuch, Justice Thomas, Barrett, and Kavanaugh, you need to respect our voices, you need to respect our choices, you need to respect our human rights, our civil rights, and our civil liberties. And if you fail, I can promise you one thing. We will fight longer, we will fight stronger, and we will fight harder, and we will prevail. I'd now like to introduce Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Very good. Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. And we were all with you this week when you were there in Buffalo. I look at this way. 50 years of precedent on the books. 50 years. And so many of us watched and actually asked questions of these justices when they committed to uphold precedent. They committed to uphold it. And now we see this leaked opinion, which basically strips women of their freedoms of the last 50 years. It literally cites times and eras back when they banned pointed shoes. It literally says on the front page that abortion is not in the Constitution. That's what it says. And we know what else isn't in the Constitution. Privacy isn't in the Constitution. Birth control isn't in the Constitution. The word she is not in the Constitution, even though the word he is in the Constitution 25 times. So how did we get to where we were, where women's rights have been protected in the Griswold case, in Roe v. Wade? How did that happen? Because justices looked at the law and interpreted it, including a Republican-appointed justice, Justice Blackmun, who is from my home state of Minnesota, a lawyer for the Mayo Clinic. And he looked at it and he wrote the Roe decision. If this actually happens, which every sign, when you look at what they have been doing and what they have been saying and the use of the shadow docket in the Texas decision, every sign points to it. They will literally be going against what, depending on the numbers, but something like 80% of the American people believe, and that is that we should uphold the principles of Roe v. Wade. The fall will be swift. Over 20 states, there's laws on the books already, 13 of them, automatic triggers that would ban abortion. we would have, as my colleagues have so well pointed out, a patchwork of laws across this nation. And why should a woman in Washington State have different rights than a woman in Texas? Why should a woman in Illinois have different rights than a woman in Mississippi? Why should a woman in Hawaii have different rights than a woman in Alabama? But that is exactly the future we are headed into. And we always say before an election, don't get mad, vote. We've got a switch of it this time, and that is get mad and vote. A few people in that Supreme Court who've been put in through a process that we all know is stacked politically should not be making the decision for millions of women in this country. Thank you. And thank you, Senator Marie, for your incredible leadership. And we will continue in that way. I think the issue is that we have to get judges, and we have been doing this, confirmed at every district court level, every circuit court level, and this has been one of actually, in spite of our 50-50 Senate, something we're very proud of. Last year, President Biden put in and got confirmed through our Senate more judges than anyone since Ronald Reagan, and 2/3 of them justices of color. So you're seeing a major shift in the courts, and I think that's going to be very important. We'll continue to do that. I personally think that if you want to bring back some credibility with the Supreme Court, you could start with ethics laws. Every judge in the country, federal judge, has an ethics law in place that governs their conduct, but not the Supreme Court. They could literally take the same ethics rules that apply to district and circuit court judges and put them in place for them. I think that would be a big step. And then the other thing is just to call this out when we see it. And it's very clear we have 3 branches of government for a reason. This branch of government right now, as I just discussed, because of the types of people they've put on this court, has run amok of not only judicial precedent, not only the ethics law, but also where the American people are. So this means the other branch of government has to step in. And if we can't get our colleagues to support us on codifying this Roe v. Wade into law, then the women of America and the men that stand with them have to help us in putting new people into the Congress so we can get this done.
Thank you all for being here. Let me just be clear. We, the women Democrats of the Senate, along with our male colleagues, are sending a message to every woman and man in this country that your rights are at stake. We are standing up with you. We're going to fight back, and we're going to take this to the polls in November, and we're going to use every lever we have here to make sure that women make their health care choices, not people in government. Thank you.
Go ahead. Is there another legislative approach here? Obviously, the Women's Health Protection Act failed to advance twice now this year. Is there a bipartisan approach, perhaps? What are you
Well, I invite any Republican members to stand with us to protect Roe. But I'll make it clear, we're not going to support legislation that allows states to treat women differently and to protect them differently in this country, as Amy Klobuchar just said so clearly a few minutes ago. Or Kirsten. Yeah, real quick.
Are you satisfied with the Biden administration's response to Roe, or do you think
We've been very clear. We want the Biden administration to set forth what they can do. They are limited in what they're going to do. I have asked Secretary Becerra to let us know what we're going to do. We're asking across the board for them to give us a plan on what we can do, but we are limited. The real question is that we need pro-choice senators here in the Senate that will protect Roe v. Wade in law. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.